do
Yes,
that. Looks
we're
like
trying.
he's pretty engaged in that. Yeah.
But anyway, the news this week, Walt. And by the way, Walt is the president of the Chamber of Commerce here in San Angelo, Texas. But he has an interesting background in that for many years of his career, he worked overseas, primarily through the State Department.
Yep.
And one of the jobs you had, and the reason why we wanted to bring you on this show is because the national news has been all about Afghanistan. And you were effectively back, 5-6 years ago? You were
I left in September 15.
So you were working for the State Department, and your job was being like the chamber guy for Kabul, right?
Yeah, I was a senior commercial officer in Kabul at the embassy for 4 years, and then I was in the private sector for a year after that. So I had a total of 5 years in country. The last year I was actually on the board of the Afghan Commercial Bank, amongst other things. So yeah, I was very involved in the economic development efforts that the United States was putting forth during that time frame. I had a small team, and we had a lot of interesting experiences, but a lot of success as well.
Well, one of the things that a lot of people here, and I certainly, I was a veteran. I never dropped any bombs in Afghanistan. All my time was in Iraq. But we feel, a part of my heart goes out to Afghanistan and all the Afghanistan vets and things like that. And there's a lot of misunderstanding. We just didn't understand Afghanistan. And even I thought that, heck, we've been there for 20 years. We're not getting anywhere. Let's get the heck out.
Well, I think that the messaging from the government in terms of what our mission was, what we were doing there, and what the benefits of that mission brought, were all misunderstood and underreported. And unfortunately, that narrative drove us to the situation we find ourselves in today. I will say, on a personal note, it has been an incredibly difficult couple of weeks. I will also note that my wife was with me at the embassy for the last 2 years of my service, so she has a deep connection with not only the people but the culture and the nation of Afghanistan. So it's been a tough outcome to face.
When you were there in 2012 to 2015, 2011, so that basically
11 to 16.
11
really.
to 16.
Yeah.
You lived on the embassy compound?
I
That
did.
$700 billion compound we built.
It was built while we were there. When I first arrived there, we lived in temporary shipping container converted housing
wow.
units. It was a rather austere lifestyle, but we watched that large embassy be built.
Where did they get the labor to do that?
The management was mostly brought in as expats, and a lot of the local laborers were local labor.
And
So it was a mixture. It was a contracted effort through a major American contractor. Mm-hmm. There were some local subcontracts. There were some local hires and some international. So it was a big effort.
Right. So what was it like to go out on the streets of Kabul? Could you walk out? You just say, "Hey, man, just walk down the street and go get some tea somewhere," or
well, it was over the 4-year period that I was there with the government, the situation evolved through those years. When I first arrived, it was pretty permissive, as we'd say, in terms of security. I generally had security with me as an embassy official, but it was pretty permissive. Toward the end, it got to be a little less so. A lot of that was driven by the prerogative of the ambassador and his risk tolerance level and things like that. It was a big, very crowded, very, very underdeveloped urban environment where 99.9% of the folks were very friendly and very helpful, very industrious, very good folks, and there was a very small minority that were not. And so you had to be very careful about the small minority.
In Iraq, we had the trouble during the surge years, 06 through basically the time we got out there in 2011 of the constant suicide bombings and things like that. Do you have the same kind of situation in Kabul?
Yeah, we had, and it came in waves. And one of the things that is not understood well, and it's one of the things that I think is driven an inaccurate narrative about the timing of our pullout in August, is that there was a fighting season and there was a non-fighting season. Most people think of Afghanistan as being part of the Middle East, much like Saudi Arabia and others. It's
Right.
not. It's Central Asia, very different. It's a very mountainous country. Kabul is actually a mile-high city like Denver. It's in the mountains, and during the non-fighting season, it's wintertime, the rudimentary road network got clogged up with snow and was impassable. So the Taliban had a really difficult time maneuvering around during those months, and it typically went...
So you couldn't get in and out of Kabul very much during the wintertime?
It was very, very hard. In fact, we even defined it as the fighting season and the non-fighting season. We had it on our calendar. And we used to, plan our activities, plan our trade missions, plan our visits around that calendar. And if you look at that calendar and how that lays out, a May 1st departure would have allowed us to exfil a lot of our personnel and equipment. During the winter months, when the Taliban was blocked from entry, as we had it now at the end of August, they had all summer to mobilize and move.
And move from and take over a population center to population center.
And that's not well understood. And I think that's something people need to understand. Is this could have certainly been planned much better. And it's something that everyone knew.
So I have a question. So as a Gen Z, I'm not really familiar with this. I mean, this is the only war I've ever known, right? But you say there's a fighting season. What exactly does that mean? Who are they fighting? Is it the Taliban fighting, or what? Explain to me fighting seasons and what exactly that means.
Well, fighting season just defined the on-the-ground conditions, which were driven by meteorological and seasonal factors. Okay, so when the mountain passes are full of snow, and I've got a lot of pictures of, vehicles stuck in the snow. You're looking at a 2-lane dirt road through the mountains, and if it's full of snow, they don't have snow removal equipment. The forces couldn't move. Now, who were the fighters? It was a variety, obviously. I mean, we had the Haqqani network, which was an Al Qaeda offshoot splinter group. You had Taliban, which were essentially stood up and supported by the Pakistanis. And you had, obviously, other remnants. This ISIS-K emergent was a kind of a derivative also of the Al Qaeda group. So there were a variety of different groups. All had the same kind of objective, which was a destabilization of the government and an ultimate takeover of the country. So
without the weather, right? If they lived in a country that was perfectly sunny, if they lived in San Angelo where you could fly 300 days out of the year, would they fight every single day?
Sure. Well, Is that
the only thing stopping them?
I think that would be an overstatement, that the weather was the only thing that drove them. I mean, I think that conditions on the ground drove them. I think that their own wherewithal in terms of manpower and resources drove them. I think certain events like elections and certain seasons that the government were undertaking drove activities. My first September 11th anniversary, I was at the embassy, and we were subject to what's called a complex attack, which is what we saw at Kabul airport recently, where you had suicide bombers, you had shooters, you had a multiple of different activities all converging on one target. We were most afraid of those kinds of attacks because they were the most difficult to thwart. So September 11th presented a target opportunity, and one that would so it's not just the weather, it's circumstances, it's events. And it's other factors as well, including their own wherewithal in terms of personnel, manpower, and resources.
When you heard, you've heard both Bush and Biden talk about how difficult it was to get the Afghanis to fight. Both of them have said disparaging things about them. So I'm trying to see both sides of the political aisle here. Do you think that's true?
I think any generalization over 300,000 soldiers would be difficult to justify. I think it's important to understand that Afghanistan is a country built of 50 different tribal organizations and wherewithals. There's several different languages. There's a lot of different affiliations and loyalties. And the Army reflected this diversity, and it also reflected this divergence of enthusiasm for supporting a strong central government. So
when you say divergent, it was easier for when we got there. Afghanistan was basically like the 12 tribes of Israel. I mean, they had different warlords,
like 50, and a lot of warlords, and I think that individuals would fight very, very aggressively. The Taliban are Afghans. I mean, for example. So there's nothing endemic to that cultural situation. I think I think with respect to some of the defeats that we saw, it wasn't a lack of ability or desire. It might have been a lack of motivation in terms of defending a particular set of outcomes that they potentially didn't agree with. So, there was a lot of complications there. I mean, we had, for example, we called a blue on green incident where we had a 2-star general, Harold Green, who I worked with very closely. He was the highest ranking Army officer to be killed since Vietnam. That was an assassination from within the ranks. So that happened with rarity.
He was
still,
a U.S. general assassinated by Afghans?
Yeah, that happened.
So by the Afghan
in
national...
2000, that was toward the end of my time there. So these kinds of things happen. But I think the overgeneralization saying that the Afghans aren't willing to fight and they're somehow cowardly or that kind of thing is really a misunderstanding of the reality.
All right, so let's fast forward. We've had the fallout, and of course, all the denouncements, and Biden claiming that it was just as planned or what have you. I don't get how you can have. I heard as many as 40,000 people being the SIVs and the American citizens, and as little as now there's only 5,500 citizens, and then we took out another 115,000 Afghans. I mean, how do we know? I mean, first of all, if you're working in country, where are you working? Are most of them in Kabul? Or are they down in Kandahar? Where are they working?
Well, in my role as senior commercial officer, I did have occasion to go to all the major cities in Afghanistan, including Kandahar, Mazar-i-Sharif, Jalalabad, and obviously I spent time at Bagram as well. So there's a lot of different regional hubs. There were cities of scale. I mean, Kabul itself is a 4.5 million person city by last count. It's difficult to actually get a precise figure on it, but that's the kind of order of magnitude you're looking at. Kandahar was the number 2 city. Herat was a big city. So, there's a lot of different things going on there in terms of the economy. Obviously a lot of retail, a lot of agriculture, a lot of...
So these Americans were working for companies that were working in agriculture? Or?
Well, the Americans that we saw in Afghanistan came in a lot of different forms. There was obviously a large cadre that supported the multinational mission there.
Right.
The Italians had a bunch of people, the Brits had a bunch of people, the Australians. I mean,
and these could be
40 nations.
These are civilians working for the government, or are these contractors working for the government?
Both. My son, for example, when he left, he graduated from Stetson University. He got a job with a logistics company out of Atlanta, and he was stationed as an expat there. Providing translation services and things like that, primarily to the U.S. government, but to also other coalition forces. So there were a lot of folks like that. Obviously, there's a lot of aid people. USAID had a big mission there, probably the biggest in the world most of the time we were there. But there were also a lot of charities and other missions there to promote.
And these people are probably scattered all over the country.
All over the country.
And so when you're out in in the suburbs of Kandahar, for example, where do you get your news from? Do you have internet access and things like that?
Internet was spotty. Cell phone service was very universal. It was one of the interesting things about the developing world generally, and Afghanistan specifically, was that virtually everybody had a cell phone. Cell phone penetration in Afghanistan by the time I left was over 90%.
Like all over the place.
All over the place.
What about like in the mountains of Tora Bora? Probably not.
Well, probably obviously there's areas that are inaccessible, but you'd be surprised at where the cell towers were built and how much investment went into that. From the private sector, it was probably the only private sector investment success story that I saw.
When you in most developing nations, their landlines don't work. They have no landline infrastructure, but they have cell because it's cheaper.
Well, it leapfrogged the technology, and in that way, we saw the same thing in Eastern Europe, for example, where they were able to have state-of-the-art built without having legacy issues in terms of transitioning existing installed base. So, Afghanistan was like that. A lot of African countries are like that. So you had that. Internet was far less, but in the urban areas, internet was available.
So when you say cell phone technology, are they broadcasting or providing the bandwidth for internet also on the cell towers?
That was far more location specific. I think that what we saw mostly was plain old telephone service. The voice text kind of thing. There was smartphones.
So it's basically kind of like a TDM thing. You didn't have a smartphone. You weren't
Yeah.
running packet networks over all those towers.
Not in large, but again, the urban areas, smartphones were there. We worked to try to get Apple distribution there, for example. There was a lot of things we were doing in order to try to bring American corporations into Afghanistan to benefit both the local market.
All right,
and
so back to all these missing people. What were they doing? Did they get notified? I mean, did Blinken call them up on the phone and say, "Hey, Fred, proceed to the next checkpoint"?
That's one of the things I find frustrating. There's a couple of different classifications of Americans in Afghanistan. There are the dual nationals, who are people who are naturalized American citizens who retain their Afghan passport. There's obviously a lot of Americans who did not have that affiliation. As far as the Americans that did not have that affiliation, that number should have been known in terms of
So
where
you're
they are.
talking about the regular American that
Yeah.
grew up in Pennsylvania.
Exactly, because to go into Afghanistan, as many countries, you have to have a visa. That visa requires a lot of information about yourself, a recent photograph, for example, and all that kind of stuff.
Well, surely now you'd probably have to have a COVID vaccine or
You're talking
test,
about the COVID
or at least a
vaccine.
negative test to
I-
probably travel out of. I think right now, if you travel out of the country, you have to have a negative test regardless.
Someone fact check Trammell on that.
I wouldn't be surprised. Most of the flights that came in, I flew commercial most of the time into Afghanistan, and they either originated in Dubai, which is quite careful with that, or Istanbul. The Turkish Air flew in as well. So I'm sure that there was some, that was obviously far after my time there. But my point in that is, the Afghan government, when you enter, they log you in. When you exit, they log you out. You have a visa. I've got many of them in my passports. So that the number of Americans were known or knowable. Okay, now whether the Afghan government or whether we got that information from the Afghan government or not, I don't know. I'm sure we never probably will know. Now, if you travel with two different passports and you come in on your Afghan passport, I can see where that number is probably harder to pin down. And that's probably the bulk of the folks left have that kind of connection there, because that's one of the motives to go to Afghanistan if you're not working is familial ties. I mean, there's no tourism, obviously. There's no other reason, to compel one to go into.
Yeah,
Making opium deals.
Why are people?
That
why are
would be
people
business,
staying?
but it'd be illicit. But that, yeah.
So why are people staying then?
My sense from what I'm getting, and I do get a lot of text messages and emails from people who are trapped there, some Americans, some SIV candidates, is that they just didn't have the ability to get out. So
how but they were going for a week or 10 days flying people out. So is it really hard? Is it But then you hear the conflicting stuff like, well, the Taliban aren't letting them through the checkpoints or what have you, or they get up to the gate and the Americans won't vouch for them.
I can comment on my direct experience, which is Kabul's a city of 4.5 million people. There's not a major highway in Kabul. There's not a single traffic light in Kabul. Not a single traffic light in Kabul. And the best of circumstances, getting the airport was tough.
And 4.5 million people, what was a city in Texas is close to that? Austin, maybe?
And there's not a single traffic light.
Not a single traffic. We tried them.
I mean, crashes all day because there's traffic lights.
We need to start Kabul Live.
It's known as cars.
It's a lot of cars and a lot of gridlock, and you can't go that fast because there's no. There's
so much traffic.
It's permanent gridlock. A lot of roundabout. It's difficult in the best of circumstances just to get to the airport. My final years there, we used to take helicopters from the embassy to the airport regularly, just for that reason and others. And it was a 2-minute flight. I mean, we were that close, but that's how we got there.
How long would it take to go from the embassy to the airport if you drove?
It depended somewhat on time of day, but it could take hours. It could take a long time.
So not getting to the airport, it could be caused by congestion.
With no
and traffic?
Taliban checkpoints, with no nothing is tough, right?
Yeah.
Okay. You add in, and the thing that, people don't understand is that, our Army has a command and control structure that has rules of engagement. It has hierarchical command structure. It has consistency. I mean, the Taliban's a loosely affiliated group of guys. You may have one guy manning a checkpoint that has a particular problem with something, and he could independent of what he's been told to do, generally
we've been
act
seeing
differently.
him, like,
You know what I mean?
slapping and beating people in the street.
Yeah, I mean, some probably let some folks through. Obviously, a lot of folks got out.
I'd definitely get beaten if
Yeah,
I was if we had to escape San Angelo, someone would beat me.
But yeah, I mean, so it does not at all surprise me that people showed up. I mean, getting to the airport's tough. The airport itself is small, and it's not well protected, and it's very, very vulnerable. And that's one of the things that I found concerning. And I've heard this mirrored from a lot of different opinions. In that, I mean, Bagram may not have been ideal as an exfil point for everything, but it sure would have been good to have that. And I think the reason we didn't have that was not because the military didn't want it or didn't see it as necessary, but they were constrained with the number of troops that they were given, and they had to make choices, and they didn't like the choices, I'm sure. But that's how that happened. If you got 600 troops or whatever you got, I mean, that's what you do. You can't be everywhere.
Going forward, knowing what you know about Afghanistan, how does one smuggle himself out, or him or herself out of that country?
I don't know, and that's one of the things that's most concerning to me is that, and one of the reasons I wanted to talk to people is to keep this in the conversation. This will fall off. There's a lot going on. We got hurricanes, we got earthquakes, we got lots.
So
of
this
stuff
is going to fall off the news radar.
Well, and it's going to. It's inevitable.
It's been
but
4 days.
It's been 4 days.
Well, it's
Come on,
going to,
man.
But how we get those folks out is, I mean, you got overland options. There's no commercial flights. I mean, we fought hard to get commercial flights in there. We lobbied very hard. We negotiated very hard on behalf of the U.S. government to get Emirates
And I'm
Airlines
sure-
and Turkish Air in there.
And I'm sure those
that was
guys,
not easy.
those airlines were very entrepreneurial.
Well, they had different.
But wait,
motives.
hold on a second. I go back up. You're the president of the Chamber of Commerce. You could get Emirates, you could get Turkish Air, all that into Kabul. Why can't you keep United Airlines here? What's the deal, dude?
I'll table that to our next discussion.
Yeah. well, I have a question for you. So, you were the senior commercial officer of the U.S. Embassy there in Kabul. So to see, everything transpire, you saw just an American presence over there with what we were doing. To see how it's transpired with no plan, how this speaking, to see what this administration is doing, speaking as that former position, not necessarily as the president and CEO of our Chamber of Commerce.
I'm not here in that role at all, by the way. So let me make that very clear. Yeah. My opinions expressed are my own.
Absolutely, yes. So if you can, just give me your thoughts on the actual, the exit strategy. I mean, if there was one from our administration here. I'm going to have a hard time addressing that because my emotions on the topic are quite strong. I think that it was a tragedy. I feel very saddened that we as a nation performed so poorly, and we've disadvantaged people who really depended on us. And I personally made assurances to people who I know are trapped there and I know are going to die. And that's a very hard reality to face. So that's where I'm willing to go with that question. I don't want to go further with it, but it's not a good time. I am in contact with a lot of our local veterans, many of whom served in theater as well, and it's a fairly common set of feelings that we're feeling across a wide range of different folks who did a wide range of different things. But I'm hopeful that accountability is shown to this set of outcomes, and my fear is that it won't be. That's pretty powerful.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to out myself, but I watched Tucker Carlson last night. And one of his arguments was they don't care. The leadership in Washington no longer, and this is when, whoever's there right now does not care what you think, and they don't think they're going to be held accountable at the ballot box because they're going to ship the immigrants where they need the votes. That's what he basically said.
I've heard that narrative, and frankly, I'm really not willing to go there in my own thinking, just because I don't really care to.
Do you think an Afghan refugee, or I guess you could call him a refugee here in the United States, is going to necessarily become a Democrat voter?
I can't predict anything like that. I do know that those folks who are coming here as refugees have a tough road to hoe. I mean, it's to leave a country like Afghanistan and come to any country, and they're not all going to be in the United States. A lot of countries have opened up Italy's taking a bunch. UK's taking a bunch. So that transition alone is going to be tough. I think politics will probably be the last thing on their mind for many years to come. They got to figure out how to live, how to make a living, how to integrate.
Since they moved to the United States, I mean, you've lived, both places. You clearly live in the United States now. I mean, we all know the United States is better than that. So why would you think that it would be hard for them when they come to such a great country like the United States?
It's not the convenience of life that I'm talking about. It's the change of habit and the change of surrounding and the separation from family and the distance from things that are known and understood to things that are not known and not understood. I had a guy who worked for me in Afghanistan. He was one of the highest ranking, we call them locally employed staff, LES people, in the whole embassy. It was an embassy of over 1,200 people, a huge embassy. He elected to take his special immigrant visa, his wife and 3 daughters, to the United States, and he went from being one of the top dogs at the embassy to being a waiter in a restaurant in Washington, D.C., and living the life of someone who makes that level of income. So it's not, but he made that choice and he did it. And at the time, I was very critical of that choice because I saw him as one of the people necessary to take Afghanistan forward. And I just questioned his rational thinking around that. But he turned out he was right. He was right to get out, and that's unfortunate. But it's, and he may be not. It's like the. I grew up in Chicago with a lot of Italian immigrants, and I remember hearing there was a joke that went around where the Italians first came to the American because they were told that the streets were paved in gold, right? And the grandfather comes, he tells a story. I arrived in America and I found that the streets weren't paved in gold. In fact, they weren't paved at all. In fact, it was my job to pave the streets. That's reality. And college degrees in Afghanistan don't transition well here. Medical doctors in Afghanistan don't get licensed here easily. So it's tough. I think politics is not going to be even on the top 100 of their priorities as refugees in our country. They're heartbroken. They're broken people. I've seen their country destroyed so many times, and they've felt let down by us. So that's tough.
Well, if you can, so right now, much of Afghanistan, certainly Kabul, is being controlled by the Taliban. You've lived there for so long. I imagine you experienced some sort of, at least seeing them. Can you explain what Taliban control looks like, what that's like, certainly what some of these people in Afghanistan are experiencing at this point?
Taliban behavior drives people to cling onto aircrafts that are taking off and risking their lives to get out. That's what Taliban rule breeds in terms of level of fear. It's a ruthless, religiously driven people who engage in behaviors which are incredibly brutal and incredibly cruel. One of the concerns I have is our treating the Taliban as a newfound potential ally. I've heard that even recently as today in terms of some of the narrative from our military folks. These folks are not going to moderate because their beliefs are religiously driven. This is not culture. This isn't habit. This is firm, deeply held religious belief that they carry, that this behavior is correct and proper. It'd almost be like taking a devout Christian and saying, you don't get to go to church anymore and you have to deny Jesus Christ as your Savior in order to have relations with us. People wouldn't do that. They're 100,000 times more zealous in their beliefs. They're not going to change. And any kind of narrative that says we will be able to leverage world opinion on them to get them to behave in a certain way it's a lie.
They don't care about world opinion.
They do not care about world opinion. So this narrative is just untrue. And I hope that it's naivete, not deceit, that's driving this narrative. I can't tell which, but the net effect's the same.
So if I were to walk out of Afghanistan, where would I go? I guess go to the Pakistani border, the 2 ports there.
Yeah, that's a tough way to get out.
I don't know if you want to go that way. I mean, they hate the best people that way.
If you look at it's an incredibly tough neighborhood, and we knew that all the time. I mean, you got a little bit of China. You got a lot of Pakistan. You've got all the stands above. None of them are picnics either, by the way. Those are all the ex-Soviet republics. And there's Tajikistan, Uzbekistan. We called them the stands collectively. All of them are very tough. And you got Iran. So pick your poison. And so exfilling people out on a land bridge is risky, difficult, and challenging, not only because of the neighborhood, but also because of the terrain and difficulties I described earlier. It's a tough place. So that whole narrative is concerning to me, because you've got women, children, and a lot of other folks that have been left behind, stranded, I'll use the word, there's not an easy way to get them out.
All right. Trammell? NetGen?
I got a good question.
Okay.
All right. So you were the, let me make sure I get this right. You were the senior commercial officer at the United States Embassy in Kabul.
Yes.
So have you ever heard of the McDonald's peace theory?
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of this?
Well, I can tell you.
Let me just premise this. So, guys,
for the benefit of the audience,
so the McDonald's peace theory states that there's never been two countries who were at war with each other that both had McDonald's, like the restaurant, inside the country. Now, there's a list of countries that don't have McDonald's, and of course, one of those is Afghanistan. There's no McDonald's in Afghanistan. So, was that ever on your list to maybe say, "Hey, let's put McDonald's in Kabul"?
Absolutely, and I'm not kidding. I mean, my last year, my team put together over $100 million of trade deals and investment deals in 1 year. Okay. We got the largest first phase Pepsi-Cola bottling plant built in Afghanistan. There are larger plants, but as far as our first phase plant, is the largest in Pepsi's history. We got Ford there. We had a Ford dealership, a Chevy dealership. We had Ace Hardware we got in as a franchise. Hey. And my thinking was along the lines of this, in that if you see these kinds of brands in the landscape, then more investment will come because of the perception and the reality of normal operations, okay? McDonald's is a late adopter, always is, and that's one of the reasons you see the effect that you've described. However, we were very close to sealing a deal with Yum Brands, which is Kentucky Fried Chicken, which is far more expeditionary. You see Kentucky Fried Chicken.
That's the word, expeditionary companies.
Yeah. I mean, they were one of the first in Russia. They were one of the first in China. I mean, Kentucky Fried Chicken, and we had Kentucky Fried Chicken, then it's Taco Bell and Pizza Hut are all under the same umbrella, Yum Brands. We were very close to signing a deal with them to get those three franchises in Kabul and eventually to the other.
Do you think that would help on the overall hostility of the country if you just modernize and make it corporate America in there, I guess?
Our motive was to normalize the landscape to encourage further investment. That was my mission, okay? Was it a mission fraught with folly? In retrospect, maybe, but in the same time, we were able to put a lot of American business into that environment. We also were able to do a lot. Typically, the senior commercial officer in embassy really focuses exclusively on American relationships because of the nature of our mission. We did them all. So we did get Emirates Airlines in there. We did work to get Turkish Air in there. We did work to get a lot of other international companies.
When you started to see those big companies start to fall in there, did you see any change of how the Afghans acted, or anything like that?
I absolutely did, and it was, there was a certain a love of those kinds of products and that kind of exposure. We were working really hard to get an Apple distributor in there because there was, as I said before, a lot of penetration of cell phone and other technologies. These were all things that we were working on with a lot of focus. And I mean, in my commercial department, we did not deal with defense contract. We were purely private sector business oriented. And we worked with a lot of high net worth Afghans in order to get those investment dollars flowing so that we could get those kind of businesses established. And I was very proud of the accomplishments we were able to achieve. It was pretty unprecedented. And at one point, we did more trade deals than Australia and Afghanistan because we keep those metrics. And our office was actually able to promote more trade and investment deals than Australia did in one given year.
So you left one war-torn zone, Kabul, and then you went to another, Kerrville.
Yeah, it was pretty rough. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's yeah.
And then you watched Mooney go to hell.
We negotiated a lot with the Chinese during that period. Yeah, and that's actually true. The Chinese owned Mooney, and that was a very challenging set of circumstances.
So I want to go back. I'm going to start the question about, you've been here a year and a half. You've been the chamber president for San Angelo Chamber of Commerce for about a year and a half. Your impressions of San Angelo, based on your experience so far. You have any bad things, good things?
We chose Texas. My wife and I my wife's an Italian American,
so
Italian green card holder.
You could have lived in like Sicily.
It was difficult for me to work there. That was the issue. And I did consulting out of Italy for a while when I left the government, and I was able to transit to the Middle East and stuff. We decided it was time to move to the United States. My wife is a green card holder. She wants to get her citizenship. She's working on that very hard. And that's another area of sympathy I have with respect to the international migration challenge. Mm-hmm. But we looked all over the United States when we determined that chamber life was what we wanted to embark upon. I've not been a chamber guy all my life, contrary to your earlier statement. But, we chose Texas. We chose Kerrville. And we've subsequently chosen San Angelo. None of these were forced decisions on us. These were choices made freely and happily. And I will say that, and I say this, and I fear that overstatement may diminish impact, but in good times or times of challenges, there's nowhere else on the planet I'd rather be than San Angelo, Texas. And I mean that from the heart. I think we're an island of rationality in a very troubled world right now, and the values that this community brings to everything it does is something that is not only respectable, but it's something that is special. And I wouldn't want to be anywhere else right now.
So back to my original question: if you can get all these airlines into Kabul, how come you can't keep United in San Angelo? Why did United really leave? I hear all kinds of rumors.
It wasn't just us; it's Abilene too.
Well,
did they leave Abilene?
There's a shortage of pilots.
It's a suspension of service, not a cessation of service, and
so
it's driven primarily by.
They didn't totally cancel. They didn't totally cancel.
There's nothing that says that they've totally canceled.
Okay.
The primary driver is availability of pilots, and that's the story I understand to be true, and it's the one that I tell.
So really, how you flip this is you say, actually, it's Joe Hyde's fault because he instead of running this stupid newspaper, he should be a United Airlines.
You call this a stupid newspaper? What the heck, what's up with that, Trammell?
I'm just joking.
Very intelligent newspaper. Yeah, it's one thing I've learned in economic development is you take chances and you work hard, and most deals work out if you're fortunate, and some don't in all circumstances. And I think our hit rate in terms of our successes versus failures or setbacks in San Angelo, I'd put up against anybody.
So you're gonna call United a draw? That's what you're gonna call it?
I'm gonna call it an incomplete.
An incomplete? Okay.
Yeah. We're not going to give up on that.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's something we're going to continue to work for, and I think under different circumstances we'll see a different.
If we didn't have COVID, we didn't have a unemployment system that paid people more money to stay at home. Well, if we had a military that trained more pilots.
Well, if ifs and buts were candy and nuts, every day would be Christmas, right?
So in your year and a half, what has been your biggest accomplishment, or what's the biggest deal that happened in San Angelo, like an economic development deal in your year and a half here? You don't have to take credit for it.
No, I mean I think that the establishment of the rail port's going to be a strategic project that'll carry a lot of secondary effects and primary effects as well. A lot of business will be drawn here because of that. So I think that's an important magnet.
So people who don't know, the rail port is up on the north side of town. There's a rail line that comes through here, basically travels from the Union Pacific line that goes along I-20, and I guess it drops down by Coleman and comes through here and goes all the way down to Mexico. We're going to have a rail port on that, which will make it easier for factories. Like if you set up a Vlasic pickle factory here, you could load your boxes and boxes and boxes of pickle jars and ship them to China. Right?
Yeah, well, absolutely, and that's actually the case. If you look at all of the states that border between Mexico and the U.S. on both sides of the border, and aggregate their gross domestic product, it'll be the third largest economy on the planet.
You mean Texas?
Texas, California, Arizona, New Mexico, and the border states on the Mexico side. You add all that up, and that's what we're talking about here. And one of the things, there's really three macroeconomic trends that are going to favor our community going forward in the post-COVID economy. One is obviously the urban to rural shift, which is a real thing. We're already seeing that. The blue state, red state shift is a real thing, and we're seeing that. And the thing that most people don't know as much about is the onshoring of manufacturing capacity to this side of the Pacific, primarily from China, but also from other areas, because we've revealed that our supply chains are very vulnerable through this experience. Mexico's working very hard to establish itself as a manufacturing center in this hemisphere, and we in San Angelo are very fortunate to be where we are with the kind of vision we're showing to be advantaged by that cross-border trade potential between Mexico and the United States, both ways, by the way. We're exporting agricultural products from here and other finished products from here. We're importing other things. I view San Angelo being well positioned over the medium to longer term as a logistics hub for the Southwest. Mm-hmm. And I think we're doing the things that are necessary to put us into that very favorable position. So again, I think that there's been a lot of victories we've seen over the last year and a half despite COVID. Just as an indicator, which I watch obviously with a lot of enthusiasm, the Chamber of Commerce is the largest in terms of membership it's ever been in its 100-year history.
Is that right?
Absolutely.
Because
true.
All these years, or at least last 3 or 4 years, while we went through all the turmoil from after Neighbors, the long-term president died, Phil Neighbors, we heard that the chamber was dying on the vine.
Well, it's I'd put us up against any chamber in Texas right now in terms of our vibrancy, our programs, and our staff, and our board, and our membership. It's a great place. It's one that I'm honored to be a part of from a staffing standpoint, but it's one that I think is bringing on a regular basis true value to our community. Most recently, I'm very proud of the West Texas Legislative Summit that we had, where we drew 10 congressmen to our community, many of whom had never been here before. Mm-hmm. You interviewed most of them very well, by the way. Appreciated that. And
hey, wait. Say that again.
Very well, and I appreciated that. I watched with great interest your very professional handling of that. We were on the edge of our seats a little bit, but you pulled it off.
Well, you think I was going to say something wrong? Golly.
Go off the cuff.
Those guys, they wanted you to do that. I mean, like Ronnie Jackson and those guys, they were wanting to go.
He wanted me to ask him about COVID.
They were ready.
Yeah. August Fluker, he sat down and he said he wants us to get knocked on Facebook. He said, let's get it.
Is that what he said? Yeah, he said, get banned.
Yeah.
That was an incredibly powerful event for our community. I think it was an incredibly powerful event. I will say, and I'm going to announce this, I think it'll be first time for me, is we were named the #1 travel destination in Texas today. Oh. And you'll hear a lot more about that.
It's Travel Texas
Travel
Awards
Texas, and Fort Concho is named #1 historic site in Texas.
So it's more historic than the Alamo.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, I've been to the Alamo.
Have you?
And I've been to this Fort Concho, and Fort Concho is probably bigger. There's probably more stuff to do.
The Alamo
and when they
has
have
better
the cannons, I've never seen the cannons at the Alamo.
Well,
they have them, but they don't shoot them.
I'm not going to. I'm not going to.
You're not going.
I'm not going to grade the wisdom of those incredibly important choices for our community as to whether they were right or not. I think they were right, and I think they will certainly benefit us by continuing to put us on the map. I mean, if you're outside of Texas and you hear San Angelo, you might not know where it's at or what it is. I still get accused of working in San Antonio from a lot of my colleagues. Thankfully, I'm not. I'm here. I'd rather be here 100 times. But putting our name in the map from a business standpoint, economic development standpoint, from a tourism standpoint, is only going to benefit us over the long term.
We're going long, but this is important. We have some important things to talk about. I'm going to talk about something that's very near and dear to Trammell's heart. Uh-oh. He has to have affordable housing. For him to be able to live and work in San Angelo, he needs affordable housing. We had a housing study done about 4 years ago. And it said, I don't know, we need 3,500 new houses a year to keep up. Is that the number right? And we built maybe 3 houses?
The numbers are not precisely correct, but I'd say they're directionally correct.
Okay, so we haven't built enough houses to keep up with
in any way, shape, or form. We haven't. There's underlying reasons for that, but there's also an opportunity for us to come together as a community with the same level of urgency that we brought to the COVID interventions. It helped us to not only survive but thrive through that challenging period. I've got a lot of faith that we can get the right folks together. We're already starting those discussions to put more $200,000 brand new houses on the market so that we can start satisfying some of that
When
demand.
you talk about $200,000, you're just talking about housing units. We could put in a gigantic apartment, for example.
Well,
Complex.
I'm an all of the above guy, and I think multifamily rentals is an important piece of the equation. I think attainable, affordable housing has a misnomer to it that some people don't understand. I'd say attainable housing for our workforce. The $200,000, that's right around the average that we're seeing right now. But new houses that are livable, and that requires industry, public, government, and others coming together to solve issues. We got issues to solve.
Well, one of the issues,
but they're all conquerable issues, and I have faith that we'll be able.
one
to
of the
get
issues
that
we have all this land around here. I mean, it's why. I mean, I know people own the land, but I mean, it's wide open places on the edges of town to develop. I mean, gigantic space here. But we have, the thing I hear from the builders, it's almost impossible to develop a new subdivision because the city wants them to build sidewalks, and the sidewalks are going to make the cost of these lower cost homes out of reach for people to get even to qualify for mortgages.
Just
to buy
sidewalks?
them. Sidewalks are going to knock
How
it.
expensive is a sidewalk?
Well, the
about
average
$5,000, and it's expensive. Yeah. No, it's as I indicated.
I didn't mean to get in the weeds on that, but that's a
I want to
question.
keep this dialogue going. I'm happy to come back and give you regular updates on progress being made, and I hope you invite me to do so, because it's going to take government, private sector, everybody coming together to solve these issues, and it's all solvable. I mean, availability of labor. I mean, I've been talking to folks, and the issues are known, and knowing the issues is the first step towards solving the problems. Yeah, so the availability of building materials, obviously we know that's a transient but an important problem, as is labor. As the good thing we have here versus what we had in Kerrville is we have buildable land. In Kerrville, the terrain and cost to develop land was so high that it was incredibly difficult.
And I bet they weren't trying to build sidewalks in Kerrville.
There were issues with a lot of different codes, and we had to work through those. And we were able to get a housing development of 500 units of $200,000 houses approved through City Council and done. I'm not confident that project has been built given what's happened over the last year and a half in terms of, but we as a community came together and made that happen. We need to do the same thing here, and we can. I mean, I have absolute faith that with that kind of will, there's very little that San Angelo can't achieve. And everybody recognizes that housing availability is a key issue in the now, but it's also going to be a limiting factor with respect to our ability to grow.
Right.
We have to address it. There is no second choice. And the thing I said in the recent board meeting at the Chamber is all communities that are experiencing success right now are experiencing the same issue. The ones that fix it and conquer it will win, and those that don't will not. And it's just that simple. And so we've got to do it. I mean, and it's not easy. It's going to be a lot of moving parts, a lot of aspects, but it's something that we have to come together, and the Chamber is going to be very involved.
When you're talking about new houses in San Angelo, where would you put them? Would you? There's not a lot of space inside the city, but
there's all kinds of option, and buildable land availability is whether it currently in the city limits or not is one of the easier issues, I think.
There's splotches of land you'll see a lot of times. Well, here's the situation. I'm going to give you an example, Matt. In Abilene, we do the football. We're here promoting Cover One that happens tomorrow at 7:00, right? But that's our backdrop. And in Abilene, we cover a team called Jim Ned, which is in Tuscola. And the reason why Jim Ned one of the reasons they have such a good football team is because that community is growing very rapidly. The reason it's growing very rapidly is because it's out in the county. It's not in the city limits. The housing developers there don't have to worry about all these codes like sidewalks and things like that. I've been told that the sidewalk code in Abilene pushed developers out of the city limits to build places like Tuscola. And so now you have these areas, and you kind of have the same situation here with Wall.
Yeah, do you see that continuing all the way to in San Angelo?
And well, I don't see it coming to San Angelo unless we have a more build-friendly environment.
And we have to develop that.
Yeah,
and
but it's easier to build in the county no matter what. It's always going to be easier because you're further away from HEB. You're further away from all your conveniences, so that means you can't sell the houses for as much. generally. But the problem we're going to have is we got Christoval, we got Wall, maybe we got something toward
Grape
Water
Creek?
Valley, Grape Creek, the Creek. These places will become places where the development happens is not happening in the city limits because it's too hard to get around all the regulations. So anyway, Tuscola is a case study, I think, in what happens when city over-regulates builders. It becomes
it's something again we have to all come together and fix. And I've got a lot of faith that we'll be able to start making progress. And again, I invite you all to invite me back.
All right,
to give you regular updates
next
on
week.
this.
Well, next week
Well, give me more than a week.
we want to find out how many houses you built every week.
I'm not afraid of accountability.
Hold them accountable for every house built. That's something. You know how we report the COVID case numbers. If every day we reported new houses built, think about that. Think about how many houses would get built. Because the more we report COVID numbers,
The more the numbers
go
up.
up. Manny Diaz, you got anything?
There's that. Yeah.
You've been over there being quiet. Actually, Manny's over there. He's geeking out.
He's like an organist at the church there with all those keyboards going in.
Yeah, I'm just having a good time over here, nerding out with the Black Magic board. So, it's a good time.
Did you make us look like cats? No.
I was on a Zoom meeting this morning trying to look like a cat. I couldn't figure it out. Not fast enough.
It was quite amusing to watch that process undertake.
But I did have a pink mustache and beard.
Yeah, it was a goatee.
Anything else that we missed?
I don't think we missed anything for this episode.
I think we covered a lot of ground, guys, and I really appreciate the great work you do for our community. I mean that very sincerely. You're one of the premier news outlets, and the amount of information you bring to our community is very valued, and we appreciate it.
Y'all need to record that. We need to keep playing it as a banner ad on a loop. Anyway, I'm Joe Hyde with San Angelo Live. Behind me is the Cover One backstop, but we're on Ask San Angelo Live, but we're going to have the football show tomorrow night, the Cover One football show. We've been with Walt Koenig with the San Angelo Chamber of Commerce, formerly with the Kabul Chamber of Commerce, talking about Afghanistan.
Please feel free to correct him.
Yes. We're talking about Afghanistan and how San Angelo is just like Afghanistan. No, I'm just kidding. But anyway, we're talking about Afghanistan and San Angelo economic development, which is very interesting. If you have a chance to wind it back, it's really, really a cool thing. For Matt Trammell, for Manny Diaz, and for myself, thank you for joining us. I'm Joe Hyde with San Angelo Live.